Martha Parker never thought it would end like this. 73 years on this earth, a lifetime spent giving, loving, doing the right thing, and now she sat alone in a nursing home lobby that smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness, waiting for a son who would not come back. The papers had been signed 2 days ago, quietly, cleanly. No raised voices, no angry words, just her boy, Kyle, sitting across from her with the same charming smile he used to get away with everything as a child. "It's for your own good, Mama," he'd said, pen already in hand. "They'll take care of you here. You'll be safe." Safe. Such a strange word, Martha thought. Safe from what? From the house she built with her own two hands? From the garden she planted year after year, her knees in the dirt, humming old gospel songs under her breath? From the life that still had her name stitched into every corner of it? She wasn't losing her memory. She wasn't slipping away into confusion like some of the other folks here. She was sharp. Sharp enough to see exactly what Kyle was doing. Sharp enough to feel the sting of betrayal sink deep beneath her skin. He didn't want to care for me, she realized. He wanted me out of the way. That was the truth, ugly and plain. Her house was worth something now. Property values had gone up. And a nursing home, well, that was cheaper than a fight over what she still owned. Martha clasped her hands together tightly on her lap, fingers trembling just enough to make her angry at herself. She didn't cry. Not for him, not for this. She had spent a lifetime holding her family together, scrubbing the floors, cooking the meals, making sure Kyle had every chance in life that she and his daddy never did. She had sat through his first heartbreak, his scraped knees, his graduations, his weddings, both of them. She had smiled through the disappointments, through the silence when the phone stopped ringing, through the years of waiting for the visits that never came. But this was different. This was a son looking his mother in the eye and saying, with a handshake and a signature, that she was disposable. Martha Parker wasn't ready to be thrown away, and as she sat there, the clock ticking loud against the hush of the empty lobby, a quiet resolve began to settle into her bones. Slow, heavy, steady. Her son thought she would fade away quietly, but Kyle Parker was about to learn something his mama should have taught him better. Some women don't break easy. Martha Parker stayed quiet the first few weeks. She kept her back straight when the nurse came by with the daily pills, smiled politely at the other residents, nodded when they asked her how long she'd been there. Never told them the truth. Never said that her own son had dropped her off like an unwanted package at the door. "My Kyle is busy," she would say instead. "He travels a lot for work." It was easier than explaining the shame that pressed against her chest like a stone every time she woke up in that small, unfamiliar room. Easier than admitting she didn't know if she'd ever see her house again. Her home, the place where she raised that boy, the place where she kept every picture, every letter, every handmade ornament from the Christmases when he was still small enough to believe in magic. Sometimes at night, she'd close her eyes and picture the garden, the soft sway of the lavender, the little bird bath her late husband had built for her on their 15th anniversary. She'd imagine the wind rattling the back screen door, the creak of the floorboards in the hallway. Familiar sounds, the kind of sounds that make a place feel like yours. But here it was always too quiet. Kyle had come by exactly once after leaving her there. He brought a bag of toiletries and a box of sugar-free candies. Like that would sweeten the taste of abandonment. He kissed her cheek, smiled that soft salesman smile again. "I just want what's best for you, Mama. You'll thank me for this one day." Thank him. The thought nearly made her laugh out loud. Instead, Martha reached for his hand and squeezed it. Not hard, but firm enough to make him look her in the eye. "Is this really the best you could do for your own mother, Kyle?" she asked. His smile faltered, just for a second. "You know it's not safe for you to live alone anymore," he said, voice dipping into that gentle, patronizing tone he had mastered over the years. "You're getting older. You can't keep up with the house. And the taxes. Mama, the taxes are a lot for a woman on a fixed income." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. "I managed just fine before you decided to help." But Kyle only patted her hand and stood up to leave. "Try to settle in, okay? This place isn't so bad once you get used to it." The door clicked shut behind him, soft as a sigh. It wasn't until 3 days later that the call came. The lawyer's office. A polite young voice on the line explaining that her son had begun the process of selling her home. The paperwork was moving forward. Quickly. "Your son has power of attorney, Mrs. Parker," the woman on the phone said. "He has full authority to act on your behalf." Martha felt her throat tighten, the words sticking like thorns. Power of attorney. She remembered signing something months back. A pile of documents Kyle had handed her one afternoon, telling her they were just in case of emergency. She hadn't read them closely. She had trusted him, trusted that no child would ever turn on the hands that raised them, the hands that wiped their tears, that packed their lunches, that held them through every nightmare. The betrayal burned hotter than anger. It was grief. Grief for the boys she thought she knew, for the family she believed they still were. She hung up the phone slowly, staring at the receiver as if it might offer an explanation. It didn't. But deep down, somewhere past the hurt, beneath the weight of all that sadness, something began to stir inside her. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something quieter, stronger, resolve. Martha Parker may have been old, but she wasn't helpless. And Kyle was about to find out just how much strength a mother could carry in silence. Martha Parker had spent her whole life believing in the goodness of people, or at least giving them the benefit of the doubt, especially her own son. But now, sitting by the small window of her nursing home room, she stared down at the envelope on her lap. Heavy paper, big bold letters on the front. Notice of sale. The address listed beneath it wasn't unfamiliar. It was hers, still hers. Notice of intent to transfer ownership, it read, signed by Kyle Parker, power of attorney. He hadn't even bothered to tell her himself. It wasn't just the sale that cut deep. It was the way he'd wrapped it all in pretty words. Words like stability and responsibility and looking out for your best interest, Mama. But the ink on the page told the real story. He was liquidating everything, clearing the property, putting the house on the market, taking the land, the garden where her husband was buried beneath the old oak tree, the place where her memories lived, and turning it into someone else's profit. Martha's fingers gripped the edge of the letter tighter than she meant to, creasing the paper. Her hands trembled, but not from weakness. The betrayal wasn't an accident. It was a plan, and it had been in motion long before Kyle packed her suitcase and dropped her at the door of this place. The next morning, she asked the nurse at the front desk for the phone. "Could you dial my lawyer, sweetheart?" she asked, soft as always, but with a steadiness in her voice that made the young woman pause. "I'd like to schedule a meeting." When the call connected, Martha's tone didn't waver. "Mr. Bennett, I believe we need to talk about my rights." The lawyer listened patiently as she explained what had happened. About the documents Kyle had pushed her to sign, the ones she hadn't read, trusting him because he was family, because he was her son. "Did you understand at the time that you were giving him full control over your financial decisions, including the authority to sell your property?" Mr. Bennett asked gently. Martha stared out the window, watching the breeze tug at the edge of the curtains. "No," she said plainly, "I didn't." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Then we may have grounds to challenge it," the lawyer replied. "But it won't be easy. Power of attorney is legally binding unless we can prove coercion or lack of informed consent." Martha nodded slowly. She wasn't afraid of not easy. She'd never been afraid of work. "Do what you need to do, Mr. Bennett," she told him. "I'm not ready to let go of what's mine." The weeks that followed were thick with tension, papers filed, letters sent. Kyle, of course, played innocent at first, claimed misunderstanding. "Mama, why are you getting lawyers involved? You're just making this harder than it needs to be." "Harder," the word echoed in her mind as she sat across from him in the nursing home's visitation room, the first time they'd seen each other face to face since the sale paperwork arrived. Kyle leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice dripping with that same charm he'd always used to get what he wanted. "Look, I know you're upset, but you have to see reason. You can't live alone out there. That house is falling apart. Taxes are high. You can't expect me to carry that burden forever." Martha's eyes narrowed. "It's not your burden, Kyle," she said. "It's my home." But he waved her words away like dust. You're not thinking clearly, Mama. You're getting older. You're stressed. Maybe it's better if the court hears from a doctor, just to make sure you're of sound mind. You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself. There it was. Not just the betrayal, but the insult. Questioning her sanity, dismissing her anger as confusion, calling her grief stress. It was one thing to steal from her, another to stand there and call her too old, too soft, too far gone to know the difference. Martha stood slowly, her palms flat on the table, her back straight, shoulders square. You may be my son, she said, voice even and low, but you are not my keeper. She turned to the nurse by the door. I'd like to end this visit now, please. Kyle called after her as she walked away. Mama, don't be foolish. You don't want to do this. You'll only embarrass yourself in court. But she didn't turn back. She didn't flinch. Because in that moment, Martha Parker understood something she hadn't allowed herself to believe until now. Her son didn't see her as a person anymore. He saw her as an obstacle, and there was only one way to remind him who he was dealing with. She would see him in court. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of smell that settled into the walls, into the benches, into the long hallways where stories like hers had played out 1,000 times before. Martha Parker stepped through the front door slowly, one hand gripping the handle of her cane, the other steady on the arm of her lawyer, Mr. Bennett. But there was nothing frail about her today, not in the set of her jaw, not in the straight line of her back. She wore her Sunday best, soft blue dress, matching hat, simple gold pin at the collar. Not flashy, not loud, but dignified. And her eyes, sharp and clear beneath the brim of that hat, scanned the room like a woman who'd come not to beg, but to be heard. Kyle was already there, sitting at the front of the courtroom, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. His suit was crisp, his tie straight, his smile polished. He barely glanced her way when she entered, but Martha saw the flicker, that tiny flash of surprise when he realized she had shown up herself. He hadn't expected that. The judge called the room to order, voices dropped, chairs creaked as people settled into place. Kyle's lawyer was the first to speak, standing with an easy confidence, laying out the case as smoothly as butter on warm toast. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Kyle Parker, has been the sole caregiver and financial support for his mother, Mrs. Martha Parker, who, as evidence will show, is no longer capable of managing her own affairs responsibly. My client's actions have been motivated solely by concern for her well-being and safety. Concern. Martha felt her hands tighten around the curve of her cane. Concern never looked so much like a signature on a deed of sale, she thought. The lawyer kept going, piling on polite phrases like elderly vulnerability and mental decline, all while Kyle sat there nodding, one hand folded neatly over the other, the very picture of the dutiful son. Martha listened without blinking. When it was finally her turn, Mr. Bennett rose slowly. Your Honor, he began, voice steady, before I respond to these claims, I believe it's important that the court hear directly from the woman whose rights are in question. There was a brief murmur in the room. Kyle shifted in his seat, clearing his throat, that easy smile beginning to tighten at the edges. Martha stood. She didn't rush. She took her time, walking to the witness stand with the same deliberate grace she'd once used to carry pies from the oven to the table without spilling a drop. The clerk swore her in. Martha placed one hand on the Bible, her voice clear as glass when she spoke. I do. Mr. Bennett approached the stand gently, like a man who knew the strength of the person sitting there. Mrs. Parker, would you please tell the court how long you have lived in your home? Martha folded her hands in her lap. 52 years, she answered. Bought it with my husband, God rest him. Raised my son there, tended the garden, paid the taxes, kept the roof from leaking, even when the years weren't kind. Mr. Bennett nodded. And did you intend to leave that home? She shook her head. No, sir. I had no plans to leave. Not until my son told me I didn't have a choice. A low rustle moved through the courtroom. Kyle sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. Do you feel capable of managing your affairs, Mrs. Parker? Martha's eyes didn't waver. I do. The judge leaned forward slightly, studying her face. The courtroom had gone still. Mr. Bennett continued, voice soft but certain. Mrs. Parker, were you aware when you signed those documents that you were giving your son full control over your finances, including the power to sell your home, without your consent? Martha took a breath. Deep, steady. Number I was not. And had you been told, would you have agreed? Absolutely not. Kyle shifted again, his lips pressing into a thin line. Martha turned her gaze toward him for the first time since the proceedings began, held his eyes, didn't blink. I trusted you, Kyle, she said, her voice level but strong. I trusted my own son not to put a price tag on my life. The words hung there sharp as nails. For the first time, Kyle didn't smile. Mr. Bennett handed the judge a stack of papers. Letters from Martha's doctors confirming her sound mental health, evidence of her handling her affairs independently up until the very moment Kyle intervened. Photos of the well-maintained home, tax records, bank statements, facts, proof. When Kyle's lawyer stood to cross-examine, the charm had slipped from his voice. The questions came faster, harder, trying to trip her up. But Martha answered each one the same way she had planted every seed in her garden, with patience, with care, with quiet, stubborn truth. Are you certain, Mrs. Parker? Yes. You're saying your son deceived you? I'm saying he didn't tell me the truth. The room stayed silent long after the questioning ended. The judge leaned back, tapping a pen lightly against the desk. I've heard enough for today, he said finally. We'll reconvene for closing arguments tomorrow morning. As the room began to empty, Kyle stood up, his expression tight. Martha didn't move right away. She sat still, watching him. Watch the way he avoided her eyes now. Watch the way that confident stride of his seemed just a little less certain. Because today, Kyle Parker hadn't faced a frail old woman. He had faced his mother, and the fight wasn't over yet. In life, true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks in quiet resolve, in the soft but steady voice of someone who chooses dignity over drama, grace over anger. The emotional stories we share here at Unraveled Fates remind us that justice doesn't always come in loud battles. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through courage, truth, and the refusal to give up. Martha's journey, like many of the touching stories we tell, is more than just a personal fight. It is part of the greater waves of justice, the unseen moments when everyday people, often underestimated or overlooked, stand up for what is rightfully theirs. If this narrated story touched your heart, if it made you pause and reflect on your own life, we invite you to take a moment, reach out to someone you care about. Check in on the people who may not always have a voice at the table. Share this story with a friend, a family member, or someone who might need to hear that they are not alone. Because stories like this are meant to ripple outward, to inspire, to heal, to awaken. At Unraveled Fates, we believe that these emotional stories aren't just tales of struggle. They are reminders that strength, kindness, and respect belong to all of us. So if this message resonates with you, stay connected, comment, share, and be part of keeping these powerful narrated stories alive. Thank you for standing with us. And remember, true strength is often the quietest voice, the one that simply says, I deserve to be heard,